The topic we will be discussing today is whether or not people can accept and understand racism in 2017, yet choose to do nothing about it.
Is when one person thinks that they're better than the other because of where they came from or what they look like.
Is the belief that one person represents their entire culture.
Is when a person discriminates somebody else because of the color of their skin.
Racism to me is people judging others based on prejudice.
Racism to me is really just the belief that everyone's different when deep down we're all the same.
Dislike of other people.
Racism to me is when society categorizes multiple groups of people to separate them.
How we discriminate, either by ethnicity, color, but better yet, we discriminate their values. Why is it? Is it because of their color? To me, I believe we cannot discriminate somebody because of its color. Period. Thank you.
According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, racism is the belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race.
Here is some information regarding the group of individuals that participated in our survey. We posted this survey on social media and encouraged our friends, family, and colleagues to participate. Out of all of the individuals that participated in our survey, close to 62% of people said that they have experienced racism in one form or another. This makes me think back to our opening question. Can that many people choose to turn a blind eye to racism?
We can see a lot about racism from past to present. It goes back many years, but in literature reviewed in class, we can see it rather prominently in the novella Heart of Darkness and the poem Song of a Call. These were written several years ago, one even over a century ago, but they still relate to today's society in many ways. In Song of a Call, the husband of Luino replies to his wife's plea to remember the ways of his ancestors, to try and not be like the white man who has come to their village. However, Akal has been educated and baptized by the white man, and now thinks that Luino is inferior and less than he is. Here's an excerpt from the poem to help paint this image. Idle giant, basking in the sun, sleeping, snoring, twitching in dreams, diseased with a chronic illness, choking with black ignorance, chained to the rock of poverty, and yet laughing, always laughing and dancing, the chains on his leg jangling. In some ways, this is a lot like today's society. People become ignorant, idle, and are stuck to poverty, and yet are still able to enjoy themselves. However, a CNN article done by Catherine E. Shoichet interviewed retired advertising executive Jim Breumer. He said, too often leaders play the race card rather than addressing what he sees as the real issue behind many of the problems popping up in today's society, broken families, particularly in the black community. This is much like Song of a Call, in which Akal focuses on his wife's enacting on her black skin and the culture rather than doing anything to try and teach her. He degrades rather than supports and rejects her rather than helps her learn the ways he's learned. In addition, there is the novella Heart of Darkness, written by Joseph Conrad in 1899. It goes through the journey of Marlowe, who travels through the Congo on a steamboat. He encounters several Africans on his journey and describes them in a rather passively racist way. Yes, he describes the African mistress of Kurtz as superb and magnificent, but at the same time, he describes the men as little more than black sand of the Sahara, many in number, but trivial and useless. His description of the African people may seem blatantly racist to us today, but think in the time of the budding 20th century when racism wasn't even a defined topic yet. It wasn't really an acknowledged topic because of this lack of a definition. In today's society, there's still people who fail to acknowledge the fact that racism exists. Karen Fleshman's Washington Post article even says such a thing, after her LinkedIn article went viral and had over 85% negative comments, which she notes were mostly done by people who had white skin. She says, meanwhile, some or perhaps many white people refuse to acknowledge that we have a problem with race in this country. They view evidence of institutionalized racism as the fault of people of color. They perceive no pattern in recent events. The idea that they might have something to do with racism is utterly ridiculous to them, and they wholeheartedly and vehemently dismiss the thought that anyone else might have another viewpoint. As well, the prior mentioned Mr. Broomer says, the massive problem that I see is that our leaders at the highest level do not even want to recognize or even acknowledge that this problem exists, and therefore they spend huge amounts of time demonizing the police force, throwing gasoline, and making the problems much worse. It seems that society doesn't want to acknowledge racism today, even though an astounding 49% of people agree that it's still a big issue in today's society, per CNN's article. However, if we're to learn to end it, we must do as the great Martin Luther King said. We must work together. We have to take note of the past and learn from it, take heed the rejection and the terrible things of the past, and make something new from it. As he said, we must learn to live together as brothers, or we will perish together as fools.
In the early post-colonial era, information came through channels like newspapers, journals, novels, and diaries. In many of these outlets, we see how people used its power to communicate the dominant interpretation of how different groups of people were inferior. The biggest part of media history is the position the media chose to represent and how it represented those who are different. It enabled dominant groups to publicize and legitimize their view of the subjugated people as being inferior. This brought the need to domesticate, contain, assimilate, or even wipe them out completely. Racism infuses the beliefs, norms, and values of members of the dominant society. Racism has become a group phenomenon that has taken a permanent hold in society in institutional and cultural matrix. In U.S. history, we see racism during World War II, during which the American government sent thousands of Japanese Americans into concentration camps after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, claiming as this was a way to further protect the rest of the nation from the Japanese, even though the main basis was that the Japanese Americans were not responsible for the bombing.
Nicole, and for my portion of the presentation, I wanted to share a quote with you that I found. It's by Maya Angelou. She said, "Hate, it has caused a lot of problems in this world, but it has not solved one yet." And I feel like this really speaks to what we're focusing on in this presentation, that racism is a lot of hate and there's a lot of things going on in 2017, but that can't be addressed until, that problem cannot be solved until we address it and we face it head on.
My name's Caitlin, and I feel like that racism is very prominent in our society today, which is very obvious through this presentation. However, I feel like you can see racism and not decide to do anything about it, and like Nicole said, like we can't do anything about it until we address the problem itself head on.
My name's Sam, and I believe that racism is still very prevalent today, and it won't be able to be eradicated in this generation. It'll take many years to get rid of, but if those of us who neglect to see racism, I believe that if those people stand up and face it head on, then it would be resolved quicker through the next few generations.
And thank you so much for watching!